Hello and welcome to the Blockchain and Us, where pioneers and thought leaders talk about their journey in blockchain technology, crypto assets, and the token economy. And I'm your host, Manuel Staggers. This episode is brought to you by Crypto Storage. Crypto Storage offers a proprietary solution to enable professional storage of crypto assets. The storage is secure both physically and digitally on the highest grade hardware security modules with detailed configuration possibilities for individual-based access control. To learn more, visit www.cryptostorage.ch. My guest today is Luzius Meisser. Luzius is a computer scientist and very early Bitcoin adopter, and the co-founder and now board member of the Bitcoin Association Switzerland. He is also an entrepreneur and investor in several startups and the founder of Meisser Economics, which focuses on education and consulting at the intersection of economics and computer science. And now, to the interview. Hi Luzius, and many thanks for taking time today.
Hi, Manuel. Nice to be here.
Luzius, we spoke almost 2 years ago, I think, about fintech, when I made a film about fintech in Switzerland. And you spoke mainly about your view from the Bitcoin angle. In these 2 years, quite a lot has happened. So which are the major changes that you have observed?
So the most dramatic development was the whole ICO wave. So we've seen lots and lots of ICOs. At some point in time, more than 1,000 ICOs were running concurrently. And this is now coming to an end. So there will be, in my view, a professionalization of the ICO market, which means that firms have to actually offer something. Today, an ICO is essentially a donation. And if the founders are crooks, they can run away with the money and the investors cannot do anything. And this obviously is not sustainable. So what needs to be done is we need to create equity on the blockchain. But for that, the regulation is not quite ready.
How many of these ICOs came out of Switzerland?
A lot. I don't know how many. But Switzerland is one of the first destinations to go to when you do an ICO.
Because I remember last time we spoke, it was this whole discussion, is Switzerland even a good business location for fintech and for crypto companies at all? And since then, I think also there quite a few things have improved.
Yes. So Ethereum did its very early ICO here in Switzerland with the foundation model, which was also used, for example, by Tezos, where it backfired a little, because one of the drawbacks of the foundation model is that you have to actually be present in Switzerland. So Swiss law says a foundation needs to be governed by people who live here. So if someone from the United States or anywhere else comes here and they want to use the foundation model, they need to use someone who is here if they don't relocate here themselves. And in that case, they appointed Johann Gevers, and then they had a dispute with him, which is now resolved, fortunately. But this has led to class action lawsuits that are still pending. And this is one of the risks. And other ICO models are not structured around foundations. They are just issuing tokens for money, but they are not attaching any promise to it. So that's also risky, and in my view, a ticking time bomb. So there will be disappointment in the future. And the important part is to evolve to the next step.
Mm-hmm. And Switzerland is trying to give investors, I think, legal certainty, but also companies who want to do an ICO. So, maybe they're making some steps in the right direction.
Yes, there's the FINMA guidelines, which helped a lot. I think it was the first financial market authority in the world that created such clear guidelines. If you look at the German guidelines, which were issued a little later, they say more or less the same, but in a much more complicated manner. So the Swiss guidelines, they're understandable by me, but the German guidelines, they are referring to paragraphs and whatever, and I don't have a clue what they're actually saying. So I think the Swiss have a very good tradition also of making legal statement understandable to computer scientists like me. So you don't need a lawyer to know what matters and what you need to do. And there's also a task force by the federal government that is looking into how to regulate everything and what regulatory So it's not about how to regulate it, it's about what steps need to be taken to enable certain blockchain use cases like equity on the blockchain. And at the same time, Liechtenstein is also stepping ahead. So they are creating a blockchain law to allow entrepreneurs to issue actual equity on the blockchain and hopefully also to trade it. So this is, I think, these are the two main obstacles. First, the issuance of equity on the blockchain, and then to actually trade it, because both is heavily regulated.
Luzius, since when have you worked with cryptocurrencies?
So I first learned about Bitcoin in early 2011. And then I bought my first Bitcoin a little later, I think in March 2011 or so.
Mm-hmm. From these very early beginnings of, buying your own Bitcoin, how did you make, this progression into shaping the legislation
so
about it?
At one point in time, a member of parliament said the Federal Council needs to investigate the risks of Bitcoin. And then I said, this is very one-sided. So I went to a friend who was leading the parliamentary group of digital sustainability at the time. And I said to him, we need to issue a counter statement. Then one motion came out that said the Federal Council should also look at the opportunities of Bitcoin. And these both resulted then in the Federal Council's report on Bitcoin, which was quite early, but quite new, also very neutral. So but it also provided some groundwork where others could base their legal opinions on. Mm-hmm. And this is something that is also very specific to Switzerland, that because the Swiss law is quite principles-based, it's not only the lawmakers that makes the law, it's also the judges and the scholars. So if a professor says that's how the law should be understood, this can have an impact on what is actually practiced and what is possible. Mm-hmm. And here we see a very interesting development this year. So there's been 3 papers, 2 by a professor and 1 by Luca Miller and one of his lawyers that came out yesterday or so. And they all strongly went in the direction of saying we should not take the word Wertpapier, that's German for security, literally. There shouldn't be a paper in it. So it should be possible to have this security paper without paper. And they argue that with what Luca Miller calls functional equivalence. That they said we should look at the function and not the literal meaning of these words. And this is one way where you can effectively change the legal situation without adjusting the laws themselves, just by saying that's how they are actually meant.
Mm-hmm. How does it work to create these regulations?
So there are these different levels. So there's the scholarly interpretation.
Yes, but how does this interpretation flow into the actual regulation then that is applied in the market?
So when a government agency tries to apply the regulation and is uncertain, it looks up the literature and looks what did the scholars say, how this should be applied. And that's how it is, how these scholarly opinions can shape what is actually happening and what is possible. And also they often provide new ideas of how can things be understood that to enable certain things. So, and this is in the past few months, I think a lot has been enabled through that way. But there's also on the lawmakers front is a lot going on. So there's, for example, one proposal that says Bitcoins should be extractable in case of a bankruptcy, like physical property.
I saw a paper that you wrote about that.
Yes, I wrote a paper about that, and there's actually a law in the making that codifies this and makes that this is the advantage when it actually is explicitly stated in the law. You can be certain about it. It's not just an interpretation, but it also takes longer and is less flexible. So there's a trade-off.
Mm-hmm. You come to all of this from entrepreneurship.
Yes.
So you started your first company. When was that?
In 2007.
In 2007.
Yes.
And that was as cloud storage, right?
Yes, an encrypted cloud storage.
And then how did you get, what happened between 2007 and 2011 when you got into Bitcoin?
So a lot. So we sold that cloud storage company, and I got into Bitcoin. I co-founded Bitcoin Association Switzerland. I also did a second master's in economics.
How did it happen that you co-founded the Bitcoin Association in Switzerland?
So we sat together and said something needs to be done. We need an association like that because
so the early Bitcoiners, the handful of early Bitcoiners at ETH.
Yeah, so this was actually quite interesting in the first Bitcoin meetups in Zurich. So if you look at who participated in there, it's like a who is who of what. So that there was were maybe 7 that met, and there was Mike Hearn or Stefan Thomas or Peter Wille or Christian Decker. So lots of people that are now very influential in the crypto scene.
And you said, this isn't going right. We have to create an association.
So actually this was Stefan Greiner who said we need an association, we need to have a public face, and the president should be a Swiss guy, not a German guy like me. That's what he said. So we said, okay, I'll be the president. But yeah, it was not my initiative actually.
But what was the goal of the association? I mean, what was the realization? Why was this necessary?
We wanted to provide Bitcoin with a public face, so that if a journalist wants to write about Bitcoin, he knew who to ask. Mm-hmm. And in the following months, I actually had to redact quite a few articles. So the journalists, they wrote something about Bitcoin because they had to, but they knew they actually had not much of a clue about it. So they sent their articles to me, and I said, this is wrong, or this should be. So I corrected technical details. So and nowadays, this doesn't happen as often anymore because I think there are many more experts. But in early days, I think this was quite important in also just getting things right and not distributing things. So there are still a few things that are often repeated but wrong. For example, in the legal literature, lawyers often write Bitcoins are data or cryptocurrencies are data. Mm-hmm. And this is wrong. Because Bitcoins are not data. They cannot. Bitcoin cannot be represented by zeros of zeros and ones. It's the blockchain that consists of data, but the blockchain only says where a specific Bitcoin is. It doesn't contain the Bitcoin itself.
So what is it then, if not data?
It's a fictive asset. It's something that's. So it's quite abstract. It's like, for example, a copyright is also something that we invented. It's an asset you can buy and sell, but it's not something that exists in nature. And so one philosophical question is, what happens if we delete all the copies of the Bitcoin blockchain? Do the Bitcoins cease to exist? And I would say no. So if you compare that to copyright, I think if you burn all the books, all the copies of a specific book, the copyright doesn't vanish. It still exists. It's maybe useless, but the copyright still exists even if all the books have been destroyed. And similarly, I would say a Bitcoin still exists even if you could erase all the copies of the Bitcoin blockchain.
So if somebody deleted the whole blockchain, Bitcoins would still exist?
Yes, it would not be very useful anymore because it would be very, very hard to prove that you actually owned some of these Bitcoins. Mm-hmm. But it's like another abstract thing we have is the soul. So when you die, people say your soul still exists. And the same, I think, applies to Bitcoin. Bitcoin or all these cryptocurrencies, they are just an abstract idea of an asset. And the blockchain is just there to tell where they are. Or who can control them, but the blockchain doesn't actually contain them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite fascinating. Did you, when in the early meetups, were those the kinds of discussions that you had?
No, not at all. So we had, I think, much more specific problems and issues. Actually, the very first assembly of the Bitcoin Association is available on YouTube. It was recorded. Mm-hmm. And one of the discussion points already back then was the difficulty of getting a bank account. So there was a lot about practical problems.
Mm-hmm. When you got in touch with the white paper and Bitcoin, and maybe then the whole concept of the blockchain, how important for you was that philosophy or that ideology?
To me, at first, I think I'm more like a practical thinker. So I found it fascinating that someone created something, a digital peer-to-peer currency that actually seemed to work. Because this is an old problem, and as a computer scientist with a specialization in distributed system, I've been thinking about this problem myself, and I haven't found a solution. So I was aware of the difficulty of the problem. And then I saw this solution, and it looked like it worked. And it does so far.
Let's go back from today to 2013. I wasn't in the space back then, and there weren't that many people really who have seen how the whole thing developed into what it is today. So I'm just wondering, what were those first steps, and what did this kind of ecosystem, what did it look like back then?
So it was much smaller, obviously. Niklas from Bitcoin Swiss was also there at the assembly. And one of the first projects we did back then is clarifying the legal status of Bitcoin regarding VAT. It was unclear back then whether you have to charge VAT when selling Bitcoins. Mm-hmm. And
which is important to Niklas because that's what he was doing.
Yes, that's his business. So, and fortunately, we had a positive answer from the federal tax authorities, and they said it's not VAT taxable.
Mm-hmm. So basically, that's exactly before you said you needed a face, right, for Bitcoin and some kind of expert body with the association. So let's say a question like this, right? How is this taxable, and how is it taxable with VAT? So you then went to the tax authorities and said, look, here's a thing called Bitcoin. People are interested in trading it. How should we deal with this tax-wise, or how did this work?
So my wife is an expert on VAT law. So she knew the right experts and one of the authors of a very influential VAT book. So we say he's the VAT Pope in Switzerland. And we asked for his advice, and he helped us drafting a letter for the tax authorities. And then after many months, we finally got an answer. So this is not the fastest process, but at least we got a good answer.
Mm-hmm. And then also the first companies, I guess, started existing. The first crypto companies or blockchain companies.
I think Bitcoin Swiss was founded in 2013. Bitty was also very early. Alexis Roussel is the founder of Bitty. He was also for quite a while on the board of the Bitcoin Association. And other companies stopped existing. So some of them disappeared again. But now I think Bitcoin Swiss is now the largest Bitcoin company in Switzerland.
Let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. Crypto Storage is part of the Crypto Finance Group, providing services for professional financial intermediaries and therefore bridging the gap between traditional markets and blockchain technology. The storage solution offered by Crypto Storage raises market standards by introducing a new security paradigm, which features 2 layers of dedicated and redundant hardware devices. This setup allows for a dedicated, independent, and highly flexible multi-signature framework. All transactions can be independently reviewed and approved on a dedicated tamper-proof hardware. The hardware security module, the tamper-proof signing devices, and the tailored software solution are all developed by leading Swiss providers with vast experience in finance and IT security. To learn more, visit www.cryptostorage.ch. We just spoke about some companies that started existing. Niklas, I interviewed him as well, and not in our interview, but in other interviews, he talked about how all of this was kind of a brotherhood at the beginning. How did you experience that?
Yes, this was very much the case. I think it was very similar in the earliest day of the internet, before the so-called eternal September. I don't know if you are familiar with the term. So in the early days of the internet, people discussed on the Usenet. And there, every September, the new students came to the universities and were for the first time exposed to the internet and start discussing there. And they didn't understand how to properly discuss online. So the niveau went way down. And it took a while after September to restore it and to bring everyone up to speed and to teach them the etiquette, how to talk to others, not to insult them, not to troll, and so on. But at some point in time, so many new people came into the internet that it wasn't possible anymore to restore the old high level of discussion. And this is called the eternal September. So because it felt like always September with so many new people coming in without understanding how to have a good discussion. And I think this is something that also happened a little in the Bitcoin scene. Like we had an eternal September where so many new people came in that you stopped knowing everyone. And so it's not a family anymore. In the beginning, it's like a small conspiracy against the world, and you have something completely new, and you want to shape the world. And today, there's a lot also of commercial interest. Also, if you look at the number of associations in Switzerland, so there's Bitcoin Association, which is the earliest, and we still operate like back then. So we are not profit-oriented. We organize events. We don't charge entry fees or anything. We don't make any money with these events. And what we care about is spreading knowledge and giving people information and allowing them to give a platform for the open discussion. And this is in stark contrast to the countless conferences. So there are many, many conferences out there that are just about making money. So they charge 2,000 Swiss francs or so to participate, and they sometimes even charge the startups that want to present there. So if there's a lot of money around, it attracts people that want to make money, and this I think this has changed a lot. It's not. I think in an ideal world. You should meet because you're interested in a topic, and you should organize a gathering because you like the topic and not because you think that's an opportunity for making money. And this has changed a little. So I think that the old things still exist, but you have to look more carefully for them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is it that it's maybe become a little bit too successful too quickly for its own good, almost?
Yes, I think we are in a hype, which is now collapsing. So the Bitcoin exchange rate went down from 20,000 to now a little above 6, and it could go down further. I think this is a healthy development, where also for the ICO. So I guess many tokens, the value of many tokens will go back to zero when people realize that there's not much behind, or when projects don't get completed. You can also see that, so if there's quite a few tokens that try to be next Ethereum, like the one blockchain for all the smart contracts. And in the long run, only one or maybe two of them can win. That means all the others have to go to basically zero. And that means that a lot of money will be burned and lost.
Mm-hmm. Do you invest in crypto companies?
Sometimes, but I never participated in an ICO.
I know you invest in some fintech companies. When you do that, what do you look at?
So it should be here in Zurich, or at least in Switzerland, because I want to be able to meet the founders regularly, to stay in touch with them. I want to understand the legal environment they operate in, so it should be based in Switzerland. And I want to know. So I want to understand the business idea. I want to know the team. So as the team is very important, it should be a balanced team of. No one should be working part-time, for example. I would never invest in a startup where people are working part-time. And then the idea should be good. So it should be something where I see a potential. And if this all comes together, I might invest.
Mm-hmm. And how do you evaluate if the team has this entrepreneurial fire or not? I mean, you mentioned just with the part-time, that's maybe one indicator that they haven't fully bought into their own idea. But what else?
Well, it's hard to tell. It's a gut feeling. And that's also why it is important to physically meet them and not just have Skype calls, because that doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you ask them questions when you meet, or?
We just talk. I don't know. I think I don't have a very elaborate process.
Is this why maybe you're not investing in ICOs? Because it's
maybe it doesn't fit my... Also, I think they're all overrated. So even for those companies that have maybe a good idea, let's say Tezos has a good idea, it's completely out of proportion to give them 200 million. Even they themselves said initially, in our moonshot scenario, we need at most 20 million and then we can do really everything. And now they got 10 times that amount. And they are not 10 times faster now. I think they're actually slower because they have too much money.
And a whole host of problems that came with it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So is that your prediction, that most of these ICOs will fail and there will just be one blockchain?
No, maybe not one, but maybe 3 or 4. I think we don't need 10 different internets. And likewise, we don't need too many different blockchains. There can be different blockchains for different purposes, but there's also a network effect. So if every token and every share is on the Ethereum blockchain, they are tradable directly on the blockchain against each other. And this is hard to bridge if they are on different blockchains. There are methods to do that, but it's always a little cumbersome. So I think there's a strong tendency for one blockchain to capture all the market for a particular use case. And I think the Bitcoin blockchain wins for digital gold, because Bitcoin is the oldest. And if you want digital gold, you need something that's old, because only through age there's trust. And that's why Bitcoin will always dominate the use case of digital gold, unless they screw up completely. But it's still open who will win for payments and for equity on the blockchain and for smart contracts. I think for smart contracts and equity on the blockchain, Ethereum is in the pole position. But if it's still possible that other blockchains overtake them, because there it's not so much about age and tradition. It's more about having the best platform for the use case.
When you had your own company, now when you compare maybe with those companies you invest in, what kind of experiences are valuable to you that you made yourself?
I'm not sure. So I think it's valuable to go through this process yourself, so you know how it feels to do everything yourself, for example, because as a startup you cannot spend a lot on lawyers and web design or whatever, so you have to do everything yourself. And this is very valuable, and I still like to do things myself and get deeply involved and to look at smart contracts and not just read the documentation, because I want to actually know what they are doing. And I think this deep interest also in the detail also helps a little with evaluating companies today, because in the end a presentation can say anything, and if you want to have an actual judgment, you need to look at what they're actually doing.
What do you spend most of your time with today? I mean, you had your company, you sold it, you're investing quite a bit, but what is your main focus?
At the moment, it's I think I spend most time with my family at home. So I'm not focused. So there's many things I do, but unfortunately there is nothing that has 100% focus, and this is something I miss. So I think it's very good, if you want to be very productive, to focus your resources 100% on something. But today sometimes I do look at legal things, publish a legal paper, then I'm discussing with different startups what they should do, or I'm involved in many things, and this is also distraction and leads to many context switches. And I would actually wish to have fewer things that I'm involved in. What I'm also doing is a PhD in finance, where I want to create economic simulations, which is something I could spend all day alone on my computer doing. But I actually rarely get to it.
Mm-hmm. Did you always want to found your own company?
Not really. It was just one option of many. I think this is when you finish your studies, it's a very interesting point in time, because then you are completely free and you have so many options. And I think that you should choose carefully. And for example, you should not do a PhD, because this is not something that helps you in the long run. You should try to do something in the real world. And if you are skilled in something and can do something, you should try to make use of that skill and maybe create a company. And so this is one of the main secrets of companies, that you reap the whole benefit of your talent. So if a programmer is 10 times better than another programmer, in a big company, he doesn't earn 10 times as much. Even at Google, that's not possible. Maybe he earns twice as much as his colleague. But if you have your own company, you have a direct impact on the value you also get for yourself. And you can listen to your gut feeling. I think this is the secret of the agility of startups. If you have the exactly same team within a large company, even if it's an innovative company like or people think it's innovative like Facebook or Google, then you have to actually apply for a budget for a project and say, I want to do this or that. And then maybe it gets approved. And then you work on it. And after 3 weeks, you feel, actually, I should change it a little. But then it's not what was approved anymore. So you wait within the large company until you have data to back up your gut feeling that you should change it, and then it takes 3 months until you have actually changed the project. But if you are only accountable to yourself, you can change it every day if you want. And innovation is about experimentation, also with the business model, and being able to change it quickly. And this gets lost in the large companies. And this gets lost very quickly. Even a company of 50 or 100 employees is not really agile anymore. And that's why innovation often comes from the smallest companies. And that's also, by the way, and now we are back to regulation, why regulation kills innovation. Because if innovation comes from the small companies, then all regulation tends to burden companies with fixed costs. It means that the small companies suffer the most. And for example, today in Switzerland, it's almost impossible to create an exchange for security tokens, because the law assumes a huge organization with many millions of capital and good lawyers and everything. And that means no innovation is possible anymore with regards to the market structure. And but other countries are affected too, and I hope we can somehow get around this, or maybe tear down some of the regulation in order to enable innovation again. In particular, to allow small companies to create something new and try out new ideas without being burdened with all these requirements that are today in the law.
I mean, you said before there will be a shakeout with all the ICOs, there will be consolidation. Maybe, incumbents will also get into the space, maybe in the medium term. What's on the horizon there for you?
I think we will see the rise of the value investor on the blockchain. Today, the ICO investors, they are gamblers. They want a 10x return within 2 months. They speculate on the sentiment. They don't speculate on the fundamentals. But in the long run, Warren Buffett wins. And this will happen on the blockchain as well. So the gamblers, they will gamble against each other and slowly lose their money. But the value investors who actually invest where they see where there's actual value behind it, they will win in the long run. And they don't touch traditional ICO with a utility token that's not hard to evaluate. So they want to invest into security tokens. And there's actually huge potential for that. If you look at the Swiss stock market, in the 80s, we had 2,500 listed stocks and bonds. Today, it's half as much. And this is completely astonishing. So why do we have half as many listed stocks and bonds on the stock market today than 30 years ago? And that's because of the regulation. It's not attractive to get listed anymore. But there would actually be a huge benefit of being listed. And here is where the blockchain can step in. It allows a company to be publicly traded without being listed on stock market. So we can get the benefits of the listing without all the burdens of the listing on a traditional market. And this the liquidity premium is said to be about 25%. So that's the premium, how much a share of a typical small medium company could get more valuable just by being liquid and by being on the stock market. And so this means we have the technology to make every company in the world 25% more valuable. And this is the potential of the blockchain in finance.
Wow, interesting. You mentioned Warren Buffett before. Do you have any role models in your work?
So, also I think Warren Buffett is, of course, a good role model in finance because he's someone who is not interested in the short-term fluctuations. Because I think in the short term, you cannot create value. In the short-term speculators, they chase value off each other. And one gains, the other loses. But in the long run, the right allocation of capital can actually create value. And that's what we should be after. So other role models might be Richard Feynman, which was a famous scientist and always had an open and curious mind. And I think this is very important to be open and to look at ideas and dismiss them or like them. But this is something that often gets lost in large and bureaucratic structures. And this is also one of the reasons why people should be... so I've become a big fan of decentralization. I think not only from a technical point of view, also if from a political point of view, it's very important to have local accountability and to think locally and not to try to mix everything and to make one global mishmash of everything. So I think this is one of the secrets also of the blockchain and this technology, that it allows small local interactions and peer-to-peer transactions that bypass the whole financial system and all the regulatory monoculture we live in.
I mean, it's really fascinating. We could continue talking, but I know you have to go. It's always really interesting to talk to you, and I hope we can do this again in the future. So I really appreciate your taking time today.
Thank you, Manuel.
Thanks so much for joining us today. More info on our guests and our sponsors is in the show notes of this episode and on the podcast website, theblockchainandus.com. To help people find this podcast, it's important that you download, subscribe, and give it a top rating and review on iTunes or on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Manuel Staggers, and I thank you very much for listening.